Hello and welcome to God in Film, the podcast where a Christian and an atheist dive into the best that cinema has to offer and see if we can find any parallels with the gospel or any other Bible stories. I'm media coordinator and silver fox with perfect hair, Giles Goff.
And I'm librarian and Vulcan flirting with her emotions, Julia Hall.
And continuing with season 8 of this lockdown project that got out of hand, we'll be looking at Star Trek Strange New Worlds. We'll be asking what's the difference between a hero and a messiah figure, and whether this show proves that God exists in the Star Trek universe. Julia, I think I introduced you to this show specifically for the podcast. I don't think you'd come across Strange New Worlds before. What did you think of it?
I like this a lot. I think what I really missed with a lot of modern television is stuff that is truly episodic. It's nice to have, this is the creature feature of this episode, or this is the conundrum of this episode. They'll time travel, or they'll have like a fantasy themed episode, or a medieval themed episode.
Or a beach episode.
Or a beach episode to kind of get over the budget constraints. But I absolutely adored the storybook episode where everyone kind of gets to be a new version of their character. So whereas Pike has been very heroic and, you know, staunch and steadfast captain of the ship, he's then this very meek and cowardly and underhanded Lord Roth that was just lovely. But all the episodes were wonderful. I enjoyed them all for whatever kind of emotion they were trying to tell you. Some of them are funny, some of them are sad, some of them are tragic, some of them are exciting. It was all in all a wonderful romp. So I'm very much looking forward to watching season 2 because I finished season 1.
Right.
And then I saw season 2 had a musical episode. I did think about skipping ahead, but I kind of don't want to rush it now. So I'm gonna savor season 2.
I'm going to lightly spoil some aspects of season 2, but nothing major. I love this show. I think I agree with what you're saying about it being quite episodic. It feels like a reaction against Discovery in that respect. That Discovery have these very long sort of arcs and very, very big epic stories, but it's very hard to pick out a single thing where we went into this. Obviously, with Strange New Worlds, it still has its large, overreaching sort of arc, but there's clear, distinct, discrete stories. For me, it's like the perfect Buffy balance of like episodic and arc.
Yeah, it's more of like a theme. You're reminded every so often, maybe once or twice in an episode, of that bigger theme, but usually it's nicely contained within that.
And it's such an overwhelmingly positive show. The one thing I always love, the one thing that me and Gene Roddenberry agree on wholeheartedly is his really positive view of the future. There was we were watching last night a bit of season 1, the Ghosts of Illyria episode, and Claire stops the program. She pauses it and says, "You know, the thing I love about Star Trek is how it's just people just being kind to each other and just being understanding context and giving people grace in situations." And I don't know if you're familiar with this concept, but when you got your partner or your spouse into a thing and they stop you to say the thing I love about Star Trek is, you're like, yes, absolute winner.
Yeah. No, I love that Star Trek has always from the beginning been, what if there was a future where everyone was kind to each other, where like money isn't really a necessary motivator of society. You can just make what you need, you share what you need.
Well, do you know, it's funny, there's the Seth MacFarlane show, The Orville, which is nakedly Star Trek fan.
My fiance has watched it, and so therefore I've watched some of it by osmosis.
Yeah,
because it's been on in the background. But yes, it very much.
So there's a brilliant bit where it talks about how we became a post-need society, and therefore we didn't need money anymore, but people still wanted to be rich. And what did being rich mean? Well, if being rich was no longer the amount of money you had in your bank account, rich was your reputation and like cool stuff that you get to do, frankly. And I love thinking of it in those terms because it's then about like, okay, how can I do something that's just going to be freaking cool and everyone's going to think I'm
Yeah.
awesome? That seems to be as good as, if not a better way of organising a society. And one of the things that people point out that's crucial about Star Trek is that before getting to that Star Trek future utopia, it had to become Mad Max. We literally see all the images of World War III.
Yeah. There was a small nuclear war, but
the way Pike describes that in the first episode of the series, it kind of conflates a few things. He says like the Second Civil War, then the Eugenics Wars, then World War III. Those were three distinct things that he's kind of like, we're smooshing these together. Now, back in the original 1960s, it's the Eugenics Wars happens and finishes by 1996. So that's when they were saying in the 60s.
We had those already.
Well, it's one of those things where nobody expected that tiny little show that ran for 3 seasons to last as long as it has done. So they kind of just keep having to kind of push World War III a little bit further down the line every time,
Keep going.
Anyway, I'm pretty sure it is time for Julia's facts.
I have a few. I have some just nice little tidbits. No, I don't think any of them particularly groundbreaking, but I just thought they were nice. So we know that most Star Trek series usually begin with a monologue from the ship's captain. Space, the final frontier. That's a pretty common.
It is common. I don't know if I'd say most at this point. I think Strange New Worlds is only the third Star Trek show to open with the monologue. So the original series has it, TNG has it, but Deep Space Nine doesn't, Voyager doesn't, Discovery doesn't, Lower Decks, Prodigy. There's so many.
What about Section 31?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, actually, maybe a select few.
Yeah, so it is only the third, if you can believe that.
Start with a defining monologue, which is space, the final frontier, going where no man has gone before, Strange New Worlds, all that good stuff. And so Anson Mount, who obviously plays Captain Pike, recorded his version of the opening monologue on the same day that William Shatner went into space on the New Shepard spacecraft.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Which just feels neat and poetic to me. It feels correct that should be a thing.
Very much so.
Speaking of the musical episode, which I haven't seen yet, but I'm very excited to watch, the part where the Enterprise and the Klingons are having a conversation, which is a pop version in the final cut. There was flip-flopping between whether they wanted it to be pop or opera, because as we know, Klingon opera is quite a big deal.
Yep.
And they did film an operatic version and a pop version.
Really?
Yes.
I love it.
So if you have the season 2 DVD release, I believe the operatic version can be viewed there in the special bonus.
Amazing.
Parts of the DVD. So if you were disappointed when they started singing pop songs and not opera,
it's not just pop; it's K-pop.
Oh, amazing! Even better.
Very specific.
Klingon pop. That makes so much sense. Perfect.
Your mileage will vary with the musical episode. It's great. It's fascinating. It's interesting. It progresses the plot as well. There's really important things that are key to Spock's entire characterization throughout the rest of Spock's existence, if you like. But if, like me, you came into the world of musical episodes via Buffy and Once More with Feeling, it probably isn't going to hit those high points. I think I don't think that's unfair.
Fair. The bar is quite high. I know Scrubs had a musical episode.
Yeah.
Which was quite successful.
Yeah, and then there's the Grey's Anatomy had a musical episode, which we don't talk about for our own sanity.
An attempt was made, and that's okay. So the musical episode was actually filmed at a similar time that the Klingon War episodes were filmed. So, and that deals a lot with Dr. Mbenga's kind of tragic backstory. But the actor who plays Dr. Mbenga, that's Babs Olasanmakun, he was basically flip-flopping between guts out on the table, saving people's lives down in Med Bay, and then that afternoon would be practicing being lifted up and spun around by lancers and doing a whole group scene, which he said was quite enjoyable. Actually, he was initially worried how that would play out, having to go from very intense emotional scenes to singing and dancing, but apparently it was a nice change of speed.
Yeah, I can believe that. James Dyer from Empire Podcast talked about how it's the show that has the most tonal elasticity. You can
Yes.
go, like, literally within the space of 3 episodes, you go from cutesy animated crossover to dark, serious war crimes episode and PTSD to literal singing. So it's
Yeah.
they really embrace the episodic aspect of it.
Like season 1, you have Body Swap, Fantasyland, and then basically Alien.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
accurate.
And beloved people like dying. But it does it so well, and I think the episodic nature of that really allows it to spring back and forth between all of these various tones. I managed to find the official Pantone colour names of the Strange New World costumes.
Ooh.
So the gold, the fetching gold that we see on command, so people like Number One and Captain Pike, is chai tea.
No.
Or TT, if, you know, chai means tea. Science officers get to wear the lovely duck denim. Comms, engineering, and security, I think, have the best steel. They're wearing pomegranate.
Like, imagine getting fired on by a load of security officers, who are not red shirts anymore. They're pomegranate shirts.
Pomegranate shirts. Dr. Mbenga having a different colour blue. That specific blue is blue heaven. So now you know. I just thought that was really cute and fun. Like, no. Commanders don't wear gold, they wear chai tea.
For the first few sort of years of Riley's birth, it was all lockdown, so we couldn't have like a proper Halloween party or anything. So one time we actually just bought some Star Trek uniforms, and the three of us had like our photo taken in my studio. I was in red, Claire was in blue, and Riley had a little sort of Captain Kirk sort of onesie suit, you know, so we're all in different colours. And Claire did her hair up in like a proper 1960s beehive and everything.
Oh, amazing.
So, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So my last little fact, Hemmer, who is a member of the Einar species from
I think
Andoria.
I'm going with Einar. Yeah.
Einar from Andoria. So he's played by Bruce Horak. So the species is blind. They rely on other senses and their telepathic abilities to see. And Bruce Horak is also himself legally blind. And he's in fact the first legally blind actor to appear on Star Trek.
That's amazing. Because one of the things about Star Trek, and we'll maybe get into this a bit, is it has always embraced disability. It's very clear quite early on. Eugenics, bad. Trying to sort of like weed out disabilities is bad and makes for bad people. And considering this was being said in the 1960s, that's actually, to be honest, Second World War is still very much in living memory for everybody at that point. So they've seen like eugenics used to be the sort of thing that sort of lefty liberal progressives would love until they actually saw what that looked like.
Yeah.
And the way it's Star Trek says, we're not going to get rid of disabilities, we're going to accommodate for them, is beautiful. And one of the things I've always loved about the show. Thank you so much for those, Julia. I'm not going to lie, it was always going to be tricky trying to come up with facts about Star Trek that I've not heard of. But chai tea,
duck denim,
and pomegranate are going to stick with me now. I'm going to struggle to take the entire thing seriously.
Now you know. I'm glad to have partly ruined the show for you.
Fantastic. Okay. Our next guest is rapidly becoming our Star Trek expert. He's an absolute joy to talk to, and he loves Star Trek almost as much, if not more than me. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hey, this is Chris Chaplin from the First Flight podcast, and you can find me on Blue Sky at Shelf Nerds.
Hi, Chris. Thank you so much to have you back again. Really appreciate it.
No, it was great to get your email pop up in the inbox saying, "Hey, you want to talk about Strange New Worlds?" I'm like, "Yeah."
So let's get into it. What is Strange New Worlds and where does it fit in the Star Trek timeline?
All right. So, I mean, I have the regular answer, then I have the nerdy answer. Do you want both?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, the regular answer is it premiered on May 5th, 2022. Its last episode, the 20th episode of the series, premiered on August 10th, 2023. So 2 years ago. We've been waiting for a while. Now, in universe, all right, it's nestled in between TOS and Discovery, But to go all the way back a little bit, since I'm an Enterprise podcast, we'll start with Enterprise. Enterprise begins 2151.
Hmm.
The Cage, where Captain Pike is first introduced, is 2254. Discovery is 2256, and Pike joins Discovery 2257, leading to Strange New Worlds at 2259.
Right. Okay.
And Star Trek, the original series with Captain Kirk and Spock, is 2265.
Me and
But 2266 actually makes more sense to my brain without looking at Memory Alpha. Either way,
either
the
way.
idea is Strange New Worlds is right in the thick of the kind of origin 100, 200 years of the Star Trek universe.
Hmm.
And so it's a nice golden age of the Trek universe to live in.
Yes, amazing. As we've talked about in the past, Trek audiences can be a fickle bunch.
Yes.
It's very similar to a Doctor Who fandom where they start off where they hate the new series and then they love it and then they can't bear to lose it and then a new one starts and they hate it and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So, what has the audience reception been like for Strange New Worlds?
I think the response has been pretty strong. However, I don't want to just go off of my feelings. Rotten Tomatoes has it at a 95% score for critics, but for fans, 79%, which I feel like there is a mix. Just to go to another source, IMDb gave it an 8.3.
Mm,
That's more of a fan. So I feel like an 8 out of 10 is where I would land with Strange New Worlds. There's a love for the episodic nature of it,
mm,
going back to that
yeah.
style of storytelling. But I know that there's some criticism of its portrayal of Vulcans and that it maybe doesn't go hard enough into social commentary as like Discovery might with like gender.
Right, that's interesting. I think one of the things it benefited from was using Discovery to be like a backdoor pilot for it. They get to sort of turn up
Yes.
and people fall in love with them and then want to see more of them that way. It's interesting you mentioned about the depiction of Vulcans because obviously we do see a more emotional Spock there, and it's quite nice to see the idea that Spock is more of a dynamic character than the kind of static stoic Vulcan that we're used to. You know, do you remember the time travel crossover with Lower Decks?
Yeah.
And when I think it's Boimler and Mariner say to Nurse Chapel about how Spock is really stoic and he doesn't have a girlfriend, and then that sort of
He's not supposed to smile.
he's not supposed to. Yeah, there's that moment, and you're like, gosh, hang on. Because of that, Nurse Chapel breaks it off with him, and you're like, good lord, are Boimler and Mariner the people responsible for Spock being the way he is for the next 100 years or so?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
as you know, one of the things we're going to be focusing on in particular here is if he's not the top captain of the series, he's definitely part of the conversation. Like Captain Pike, what is the history of Captain Christopher Pike?
Yeah, originally played by Jeffrey Hunter in The Cage, the unaired pilot of Star Trek that failed to meet the expectations of the studio. They said it was too cerebral. And so luckily they got another shot and brought in William Shatner. But
Made it much
Jeffrey
less
Hunt,
cerebral.
the common pop cultural thought of Kirk is he's just the guy that grabs women and kisses
Yeah.
them and does like the double legged kicks and karate chops and all those kind of things like Kirk Fu. But he was a smart guy too, and he
Mm,
could thrash anyone in chess. So, but yeah,
yeah.
Jeffrey Hunter cost too much money to bring back
Really, that's interesting.
because I think he had a movie career
Like
outside of
proper sort of
television.
matinee idol type as well, wasn't he?
Yeah, yeah. I was just gonna say, we get a brighter, more vibrant Star Trek when we bring in Shatner, and they change the colors and redo the whole kind of look of the series.
Mm.
And Hunter, the first time I saw The Cage was incredible seeing this captain wrestling with his duty, and it's a lot more Discovery season one. If you
Mm.
take, you're right, we're just deep in our introspection, and the weight of it all is pressing us down. And that is the captain of the Enterprise in The Cage,
Yeah.
but not quite the captain that we get in Kirk.
No, no. One thing I quite liked about Discovery was I don't know if you remember in season 2, they have that bit where it says previously on Star Trek, and then it does
Yes.
the whole flashback to the Cage episode and everything. And it's this lovely way of just saying, look, as far as we're concerned, Jeffrey Hunter's Captain Pike and this Captain Pike are exactly the same person, and you just need to get on board with that.
That stunning transition of the camera from Hunter to Ensign Mount, it was just like magic.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
beautifully done.
Where does Strange New Worlds kind of rank in your Star Trek pantheon?
I haven't officially ranked it myself because it's not complete.
Yeah, no, fair play.
But as it is right now, it is probably an 8,
Right.
right? There's a few episodes that are not the best, but there's nothing that's bad, and the emotional threads throughout the series are really well orchestrated and picked up episode to episode, even though the stories are all different along the way.
So what would you say is the high watermark of Star Trek for you? Are we still looking at TNG?
TNG is high for me for nostalgia. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what I grew up with. Probably the best Star Trek, just narratively, is Deep Space Nine. But I think Discovery, on rewatches, it gets stronger and tighter every time I revisit that series.
That is fascinating. I'm gonna have to.
It is. Because if you asked me that halfway through season 1, I would have been like, no,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah, it definitely takes a while to find its feet. Listen, Chris, thank you so much for talking to us today. I'm so happy to have you on. You can come back anytime.
Anytime you need me, I'll be here.
Awesome, thank you.
Bye.
So, Julia, that was Chris Chaplin. What do you think?
Honestly, it's really cool to have like an international guest. That just feels that we've kind of made it a little bit, especially someone who knows so much about the subject as well. It's always nice to hear from an expert. So,
I mean, this guy writes microtracks. He's literally the person who wrote a conversation between Chief Miles O'Brien from Deep Space Nine and Jesus. That's the kind of headcanon I want to be getting on board with,
we're getting the heavy hitters on the podcast. I don't know, it just feels very affirming, very real.
Absolutely. We'll put a link to Chris's podcast in the show notes, and thank you again for Chris, and we will drag him back onto the show whenever I can think of a slight tenuous connection to God
Kicking
in any
and
Star
screaming.
Trek. Yeah. Just a quick reminder that if you'd like us to stay on the air and ad-free, you can go to www.patreon.com/God in Film Podcast and sign up to our Bishop Waller Bridge tier, where you can check out our longest ever episode on the life and works of one Bruce Springsteen. Here's a clip. He's brought up Catholic. The third chapter in his autobiography is literally titled The Church. He talks about the weirdness of going to confession, where he talks about thinking up like a list of acceptable sins. Then he says, how much sinning could you have done at a second grade level? Plus, you can hear additional interviews and special bonus episodes like our God in You 2 and God in Gaming episodes. And if you're a bit strapped for cash and want to support us without spending money, then leaving us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Facebook, Podbean, or wherever you're listening to this would be a big help. It makes a massive difference in pointing people towards the show. And now it's time for Finding the Faith in the Film.
Ba-ba!
As we've covered in previous episodes, Star Trek is a deliberately secular vision of the future. But I kind of feel like Strange New Worlds seem to be the most intent on pushing back at this particular rule. And it arguably references the existence of God and provides us with probably our most deliberate Star Trek Messiah figure. So what do you know about Gene Roddenberry and his vision for Star Trek?
Honestly, not much.
Okay.
I know Captain Pike's story, so I've watched the Discovery episode. That's relevant to the story that we see in season 1. I've gone back and watched the 2 original series episodes that show us the end of Captain Pike's story. It's very weird going from shiny 2020s production value to 1960s production value.
We will get onto that in a minute. So
so I know Pike's story, but not really about any of the masterminding behind it.
Yeah. So basically, Gene Roddenberry was I think he was a pilot at one point. I think he was a cop at another point, and then he becomes a TV producer. And Ever since its first airing in 1966, Star Trek has presented this utopian view of the future, and the show's creator creates a world where humanity has grown past its petty squabbles. That's the idea. That's the high concept, if you like. So, in Roddenberry's 23rd century, so prejudices around race, class, or sex were non-existent. We might not notice it these days, but on points where Uhura comes in and takes the helm and starts to sort of like fly the ship, it would have been absolutely massive to see a woman of colour doing that. And you could get away with that sort of thing because you had a white straight man in the captain's chair and two white straight men as the sort of next leads up. You know, you could fit in the diversity around it and things. Sulu is a funny example because he's Asian, but he's deliberately non-specific Asian. He was named after the Sulu Sea because it touches or every sort of country in that area. Chekhov obviously sort of comes in, and he's the sign that Russians can be accepted in this future, and that people who are your enemies now won't necessarily be your enemies tomorrow, basically. So there's this rainbow coalition of Asians, Africans, Russians, and one very prominent Vulcan. There were, however, some groups that could not get a look in. So one group in the 1960s that got very little representation was sexuality, and the other was religion. Now, as best I can tell, Gene Roddenberry didn't have any problems with sexuality or LGBTQ issues, as we'd call them, or gay issues, as they would call them at the time, even though that was suppressed for quite some time and just would have been unthinkable in the like ultra-conservative world of 1960s television. The show has definitely made up for it since. Religion, however, has not fared quite so well in Gene's world. So Gene was a humanist atheist, and his stance on religion sometimes kind of borders on the antagonistic. He said at one point, religions vary in their degree of idiocy, but I reject them all. There were worse quotes that were attributed to him, but I couldn't verify them, so I've left them out. And he had a long sort of interview with like a humanist magazine in the early 90s. So Star Trek staunchly represents Gene's secular view of the world, you know? And in the original show, Kirk and Spock and that would visit alien worlds run by deities who almost always turn out to be like megalomaniacal supercomputers or godlike aliens. So references to any human religions are brief and often quite non-committal. And after Gene's death in, I want to say 91, the writers and producers would ease up on Gene's strict rules. So there was one rule that Gene had where human beings wouldn't have any interpersonal conflict. They basically, the idea is that humanity as an entire species has just gotten over its issues. So
that would be so nice.
It would be so nice. It is very difficult from a storytelling perspective where there's no drama without conflict and you can't have any conflict between your human characters. It does make things quite tricky. I think it's Rick Berman, who is an interesting figure who we don't have time to get into now, but apparently he had a bust of Gene on his desk, and after Gene died, whenever they were going to do something that they thought Gene wouldn't approve of, he actually tied a little sort of a blindfold around the bust.
Oh my god.
You know.
That's kind of cute.
Yeah. So we've talked about how religion would get like a more nuanced representation, but only if it was like an alien religion. And I think we've covered that fairly extensively in our Star Trek Discovery episode. But human religions are still consistently sidelined to the point where it got taken far too far during a filming of Discovery. I think we talked about this.
I think this is one of my facts. So Jason Isaacs, who plays
Captain Lorca,
Captain Lorca, that's his name, ad-libbed a line, for God's sake, and he was pulled up on it as that was something that he couldn't say, and apparently he joked and went, "Oh, what about for f***'s sake, can I say that?" And they said, any swear word you like comes before God, basically.
Yeah. So that was the episode's writer, Kirsten Beyer, said that And I think it was quite a bone of contention in the Discovery writers' room. And you do get the feeling that there's something kind of flowing out of that. There's a real tension, because that's the secularism taken to an absolute ridiculous end, because you can't erase the concept of God out of human history. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, not just from one perspective either, but from multiple perspectives, and that's just looking at Abrahamic religions and not even thinking about the polytheistic religions or the other smaller or more localized religions. It's consistently ingrained since prehistory, really.
Yeah, definitely. So what is interesting, though, is the way that in a franchise that seems so resistant to the idea of God, how concepts related to him seem to seep into the storytelling, like particularly the Messiah figure. So specifically, that's a character who sacrifices their life to save others. That is hardly new in Star Trek. I can think of at least 2 captains that come to mind.
God!
Do you think you can name the 2 captains that have sacrificed themselves for the others?
James T. Kirk, right? Isn't there a thing with the Wrath of Khan? Because then they switched it in one of the films, in the film version with Benedict Cumberbatch, and it was like a big thing because it was like a mirror of something that had already happened.
Yeah,
right?
I wasn't even thinking about that universe. So I'm being cheeky here, because Spock is a captain in Wrath of Khan. He's been promoted to that point. And
is it Spock that dies
Spock
originally and then
himself?
Yeah, and then in the movie with Benedict Cumberbatch, it would have been James Kirk.
And then in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Captain Sisko sacrifices himself to sort of like hold back the Par Wraiths to stop them from destroying Bajor and all the rest of it. So that we are used to the idea of people sacrificing themselves in heroic situations. That's not new or particularly interesting at this point, but there is something particularly novel about Captain Christopher Pike. And your favourite captain is something that you kind of hold sacred in your heart, right? Mm. And growing up in like the 90s, it was either Kirk or Picard. That was the thing. And I was like a ride or die Picard. He's like my ideal granddad. So to have somebody dislodge Picard as your favourite captain, that's not a small thing, you know? Or actually, it was Picard, then I probably transitioned to Sisko, and now it's Captain Pike, and we're going to talk about Captain Pike now. So for those of you in need of a bit of trivia, it's Pike, not Kirk, who was the first captain of the Enterprise to be depicted on the show, okay? So in an unaired pilot, Captain Pike is portrayed by matinee idol Jeffrey Hunter. You've seen some of him from the Menagerie, haven't you?
I remember now, you talked a little bit about this with Chris.
Jeffrey Hunter is like weaponized handsome, matinee idol, piercing blue eyes. Like this captain,
they're really blue.
He's seasoned, he's world weary, and he's like very serious. And he's perhaps a little too serious, as the network didn't like the show in its current form. They weren't connecting with it for some reason. They did, however, take the unconventional step of ordering a second pilot, which was a bit lighter and a bit more colourful in tone. And reports differ wildly as to whether Hunter was like quit or fired. Some say that his wife was acting as his agent at this point, and she was throwing away around a bit too much. He'd been Jesus in King of Kings, and they thought, well, he can't spend his time on a silly sci-fi show. But really, at that point, Hunter's career had kind of already hit his high. It was kind of went on a bit of a lull from that point. Either way, Jeffrey Hunter doesn't return to the role of Captain Pike. And then the character of Pike isn't recast. He's moved off and he's replaced by one James T. Kirk, played by a young William Shatner. So this then presents you with like a bit of a problem, because the production company has an entire episode's worth of footage that they can't use now, because there is literally a different captain in the captain's chair. There's different uniforms. So the footage cost around $645,000, which in
is that then?
That's then. So in 2025 money, that is like $6.5 million, of just unusable footage, stuff they can't use. So how do you get around this eye-watering problem? Well, the solution is that Gene writes this framing story where Spock mysteriously commandeers the Enterprise and kidnaps the now fleet captain Pike. And when Spock turns himself in for court-martial, he presents video footage in his defence. And it's footage which just so happens to be selected footage from the unaired pilot. So that is from the season 1 of Star Trek, the original series. And it has the weird honour of being the only time where characters in Star Trek sit down and watch an episode of Star Trek.
I mean, the episode itself was wild because initially, looking at how Spock behaves in Strange New Worlds, where he's a little more loosey-goosey, you know, he's got a girlfriend, he's doing the whole bait and switch, pretending to break up with her and smooching other people, you know, he's a little bit, and I'm like, this doesn't feel like the Spock that I have an idea of, because other than these 2 episodes, I've not seen any original series. And then I watched the first half of the Menagerie, and Spock's like, I'm going to mutiny and commandeer the ship, and I'm like, no, okay, actually, just check, this tracks. I've seen this already. Like, this is absolutely something that he would do.
One of the fun things, I was having an argument with Star Trek fan inverted commas on the internet, because, you know,
oh dear,
we've all got to do something for fun. And he was saying, this is crap Trek. Spock would never act like that. Spock is not emotional. He's cold and he's logical. It's like, yeah, why do you think he became cold and emotional? Because somebody broke his heart, and what he did was he retreated into emotionless logic to get away from that, so he wouldn't get hurt again. And if the Menagerie teaches us anything, Spock is a messy who loves the drama, and he is also absolutely ride or die MF. Do you know what I mean? You know,
like, he was literally willing to put everyone on the line for the death penalty, by the way, for Captain Pike to then go and like live the rest of his life with a hot babe on Talos 4, which honestly, that is the ultimate wingman material.
That's the kind of
right
friend
there.
you want. Do you know what I mean?
Incredible. I mean, the other half of that episode is also just a bit, a group of people who want to, like, Adam and Eve, humans as slaves. I was like, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't know what to say, man. The Telosians are weird, they're freaky little dudes. This is one of those really interesting things where an entire sort of character arc has come out of a logistics problem, okay? Because for filming that show, The Menagerie, Jeffrey Hunter was unavailable for filming. He was off doing something else in a Western or filming another film, something like that. So they had to recast another actor in the role. And you can get away with that sometimes, except for when you are literally watching footage of Jeffrey Hunter doing stuff. So their way around this particular problem is they get actor Sean Kenny, who they slather him in Burns makeup. They make his hair blonde, which I still think is a weird choice, but okay.
I don't know if this is an actual scientific thing that can happen biologically, but I love it as a trope where someone undergoes something so physically or psychologically shocking that it causes their hair to like lighten or change colour. Give me that as a trope in itself. I don't know, I just eat it up, but that's what it felt like to me, especially if he's been in some horrific reactor accident.
So it's funny you mentioned that particular trope, because I think that either comes from the actual Bible, where Moses sees the face of God and he comes down sort of glowing, where his face is glowing because he's seen the face of God, or it comes from the Charlton Heston Ten Commandments film, where Moses goes up with one hair colour and he comes down Mount Sinai having seen the face of God, but now his hair and his beard is all white, you know? So I think that could be...
I love it, especially if it's like one streak, like one section. I don't know what it is.
I love a good sort of like grey streak.
Eat it up with a spoon. So that's what it felt like to me. I mean, it was very clearly a wig, and they very clearly made a decision about that, but that's how I rationalised it in my brain.
So anyway, Sean Kenny, he's in the Burns makeup, the blonde hair, he's in this incredibly restrictive wheelchair, and he can only communicate through a series of beeps. They call it the beep chair in the fandom, you know? And it is wild, because even if it wasn't the 23rd century, in the 60s, we already had Morse code. He could have talked a lot more in more complicated ways beyond that point.
Honestly, that hadn't even crossed my mind, but now that you say that,
yeah. And also,
that's
you
wild.
have Vulcans are telepathic. You could just do a mind meld with them and have a proper chat. But this is the story that was presented to us, and we're going to work with what we've got. So we've got Roddenberry writing in the explanation. It's quite offhand about how Captain Pike's been seriously injured in a traumatic incident, saving some cadets on a ship, and he's now suffering from like locked-in syndrome. So we will just accept the story on the premise that it gives to us, you know? And the fascinating choice that the producers of the show made when they were doing Discovery was, rather than putting that in Pike's future, meeting the Telosians and the story of the cage, the original pilot, they put it in his past. So it's almost like an in-betweequel between that unaired pilot in the beginning of Star Trek, the original series.
Yeah, Strange New Worlds occurs after Discovery, doesn't it?
It occurs after the first 2 seasons.
Yes.
And then obviously Discovery goes into the future, so it's
time travel.
So that second series of Discovery is I don't know if it's intentional or not, but it basically serves as a backdoor pilot for Strange New Worlds. And rather than like steering clear of this convoluted backstory, they really lean into it. So we've got a confident, able-bodied Pike who we've talked about how he makes you feel about yourself and how great he is, and he receives a premonition of his own terrible fate. He has to go down to the Klingon moon of Boreth, where there's a monastery, and there's a whole thing about Boreth and Klingon monks, which we don't have time to get into. But he has to get this sort of time crystal, and the monk tells him that if he just wants to walk away now, he can probably escape his fate. But the moment he grasps the crystal, his fate will be sealed. He sort of grabs it and he gets this premonition of the future, and you see him on this Class J starship, and he's trying to get the cadets out of there, and half of his face is melting off and the rest of it, and he's just genuinely terrified, you know? And he says to himself, you're a Starfleet captain. You believe in service, sacrifice, compassion, and love. No, I'm not going to abandon the things that make me who I am because of the future. It contains an ending I hadn't foreseen for myself. So, Discovery quite simply just had way too much plot going on to resolve Pike's story satisfactorily. Yeah. So when Strange New Worlds launched, it gives us this time and space to really unpack his trauma. So how would you describe where Pike is at the start of Strange New Worlds?
There's clearly something going on. Like at the very beginning, he's very reluctant to go back to service. He doesn't want to be a captain. Yeah. He doesn't want to touch any of that, understandably. But then I find once he's there, he seems to settle in quite quickly. Yeah. There doesn't appear to be as much of a resistance as perhaps you'd think. Like, he's still doing his job as captain. He's finding time to cook for the crew.
Yeah.
That was, apparently the cooking thing was something that Anson Mount sort of suggested for Pike, because obviously he can't have horses and horse riding on the Enterprise. He needed
Sir Nasalot had to stay at home, you know.
Sir Nasalot. He needed something to kind of wind down and make him a bit more human and approachable. And how would he do that with cooking? Which I think is really interesting. He feels grounded. He feels confident. Like, there are times when he wavers.
In the quiet moments, though, you do see him considering this, and when he's talking to Spock and when he's talking to Number One, it's like, is this knowledge of the future, is it going to make me too scared? Am I going to hesitate when I should be bold? Or is it going to make me too bold? Am I going to rush into things because I know that my time isn't up yet? We see him, he has this perfect trauma beard, and he's back
That's
in...
That's another trope I love.
He's back
the
in...
trauma beard.
I want to say Montana... And his whole thing is like, I'm not going back into space, because you can't have an accident in space if you never go on a spaceship, right? And then obviously Admiral Robert April, his old commanding officer, draws him back in to save Una, his first officer. And after Pike resumes command of the Enterprise, Una is aware of his vision of the future, and she tries to dissuade him. She's like telling him like the future isn't set. You don't just have to walk into this and be disfigured. At which point Pike tells her he knows the names of all the cadets he saves on that day. He knows all of them. It's like this most comprehensive vision of the future, and he just says, stay the course, save their lives. And he just keeps
Yeah.
it real simple in that respect, you know?
Especially when one of those cadets or eventual cadets shows up at the end of the season,
Yeah.
which understandably sends him on a little bit of a spiral.
Yeah. So that young boy is called Mart, and he's really eager to join Starfleet, and he's one of the cadets.
He's obsessed with Pike.
Yeah, he's one of the cadets that Pike is unable to save, who's already died before Pike went into that engine room, you know? So he's about to write a letter trying to save the boy, to sort of dissuade him, and then the future version of himself arrives. You saw that episode, didn't you?
Yes.
And then the screw is kind of twisted even further, basically, because Pike meets the Romulans, and it's basically a riff on an original series episode where Pike just makes different choices than Kirk made, you know? It's basically like a U-boat submarine kind of drama. It's one of these fascinating things where, because Pike acts mercifully and he tries to give the benefit of the doubt, it ends up sparking a war with the Romulans that goes on for decades. It's one of the reminders of a line from Next Generation that Picard says, like, Mr. Data, it is possible to make no mistakes and still lose. That is not a failure. That is simply life. You know? Yeah. And that's something I think about all the time.
That quote, it's up there with "if nothing we do matters, all that matters is what we do" from Angel. It's like up there
100%.
For me. That quote.
Yeah, in that sort of alternate vision of the future that Pike gets, he also sees that he would lose Spock. And as we'll find out, Spock is important not just to the people in his century, but by the time it gets to TNG 100 years later, and even Discovery like 1,000 years later, Spock has been crucial to the reunification of Vulcan and Romulus, you know? So
it's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, kind of a big deal. And it's so future Pike tells him, like, yes, you can save yourself, and yes, you could still be in the chair, but the choices you make, because you are too good of a person to act out of fear, because you're too noble, this is where we'll always end, and Spock is gonna die instead of you. And there's this, like, every time we change the path, he dies, and it makes Pike resolve to stay the course and to keep going. So when viewed through this particular lens, Captain Pike's story in Strange New Worlds is basically one long extended Garden of Gethsemane scene. So in both cases, we see a man fully aware of the impact his sacrifice will have for the future, but at the same time still feeling nervous and scared and wanting to reject the bad hand he's been dealt. However, in both cases, both Jesus and Captain Pike recommit themselves to their mission and their fate, you know, and we see him do this consistently. He made the choice back in Discovery. He makes the choice at the start of Strange New World season 1. He makes the choice again at the end of Star Trek season 1. This constant sense of, like, having to recommit yourself to something. It doesn't get easier. He doesn't stop being afraid.
Yeah.
As a result of this, watching Strange New Worlds now has this. It's taken on this kind of similar experience to watching The Chosen, which is like the multi-season show centered around Jesus and his disciples. Because
it's the life of Star Trek Jesus.
Star Trek Jesus. Both shows have an effortlessly charismatic central character who leads those around them with grace and humility. And the more you fall in love with these characters, the more you're reminded that something absolutely horrendous is going to happen to them. And while we know it must happen, these things have been set into motion literally before we were born, it still makes us anxious at the thought of going through it, you know? And we know things are kind of going to be okay at the end, but it's still, you still got to go through that. So I find that fascinating. And I find it funny to think, like, it's over 30 years now since Gene Roddenberry's death, so it's hard to tell what he would have thought about the evolution of one of the first characters he wrote for Star Trek. Like, on the one hand, he might have rejected it out of hand for its parallels with the story of Jesus, but me personally, I think Gene Roddenberry might just love it for what it really is, which is really, really good storytelling.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting to watch a character go through the motions knowing where they're going to end up. Because that's not a usual circumstance for most characters in media that we watch. They don't know where they're going to end up. They don't know what they're going to do, which is why other sacrifices like Sisko and Spock are not predestined years in advance. They're things that they know that they have to do probably a lot closer to the time. This,
for me, is the thing that distinguishes in between being a hero and being a messiah figure, and it is my own definition. It's not. I don't have anything else to sort of back this up with, but theoretically, we could all give our lives for somebody we love in the moment, in the heat of the moment, or at least we certainly hope that that would be us. There is a list of people I would happily die for, and it got dramatically smaller once my boys were born.
Okay, forget about the MySpace top 8. Are you making Giles's top 8 would sacrifice myself?
Because it's like, okay, well, I could die or you could die. I could die and you could live, and that's great, but who would look after my boys? It's just like, Claire's going to be flipping knackered looking after both of them, and you just know that the second I'm out of the picture, she's going to be shacking up with Henry Cavill, and or if she's slumming it, Benedict Cumberbatch, and I can't be having that.
Hey man, if 15-year-old me heard you talk like that, you'd be out of here.
So there we go. That's where there's a messiah figure in Star Trek, and again, we have talked about this at length. The way atheist creations still can't help but have a messiah. They seem to crop up like nobody's business. The last thing I want to talk about, and this is a lot smaller, is we're still with Pike, but we're now with looking at a different aspect. Did you pick up on any references to his dad?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I may have been distracted by the chai tea costumes,
So, like I say, you haven't seen all of it, so there'll be some things. But in Star Trek Discovery, just before he does that line about the Arthur C. Clarke line about the any alien technology suitably advanced is indistinguishable from God.
Yes.
He says that in that New Eden episode, I think it is, that his father was a science teacher who also taught comparative religion, which I think is a wonderful mix. He says like this led to some very confusing ideas in the Pike household, and it caused him to not agree with his father very on much. And I think his father is in like not quite canon stuff. He's referred to as Charlie Pike, so we'll go with that name. And there's also the crossover episode with Lower Decks called Those Old Scientists, which is like pure comedy. It's so funny, it's brilliant, but it has these real moments of incredible pathos, because you've got Boimler and Mariner coming from the future who know about Pike's ultimate fate, and there's this one bit where they're trying to talk about it, talk around it, and Pike is trying to convince Boimler not to encourage his crew to have a birthday party for him. And Boimler says, and this is an angle I've always agreed with, like, you never know which birthday party might be your last, and you want to give people as many chances to celebrate you as possible. And there's this thing where Pike says he's the same age now as he was when his dad died, and that's kicked up some issues with him, and he's had a lot of unresolved issues with his father. So what he's planning to do for his birthday, he's going to go to, I think, Setlik 2 or Setlik 3, and he's going to go onto like an ice field, sit in a fishing cabin on the ice with a good bottle of whiskey, and finally have that talk with his dad. And the Boimler sort of convinces him not to, and saying, well, look, how many people that love you wish that they would get to have one more conversation with you? It's brilliant. And to the best of my knowledge, we never canonically find out what that talk would be about. We never find out exactly what they were beefing about. But I have this sneaking suspicion that faith might have something to do with it, because there's this one small scene in the series opener of Series 3 where Pike has a girlfriend. Her name's Captain Marie Battelle. I love the fact that his long-term relationship is with somebody of equal rank to him who is not. She's nowhere in his chain of command.
Because we see her throughout the seasons, right?
Yeah. Wherever their relationship started, it definitely has become something more serious. And minor spoilers, but by the end of season 2, she gets infected by the Gorn. And
no.
Gorn are about to pop out of her body, and they are doing everything they possibly can to save her. And just when they've saved the ship and they're out of immediate danger, and they've performed this like radical surgery on Captain Patel, there's this one moment towards the end of the episode where Pike comes in to the medbay, into sick bay, and he sees her, and there's nobody else there, and you can tell his heart's racing, and he just kind of looks up, and his words are, okay, Dad, you win. And he goes and he sort of like sits down by her bedside, and he lowers his head and he says, Our Father who art in heaven. And she wakes up, you know.
Oh my God. What if his dad is God?
I mean, I'm not gonna...
And he is Jesus. It tracks. It tracks. His dad became God.
So, okay, there's my tongue-in-cheek interpretation, right, which reminds me of when you're praying, and this is a particular bugbear of mine, you don't have to come up with a fancy way of saying things. You're not praying to an audience. You can literally just go, God, help. And that's it. That serves the same purpose as saying, Father God, creator of the universe, we just lift you up and we adore you. We praise your name, Lord Jesus. And we just ask for that you, with your life-giving powers, will heal this. But it does the same thing.
Save yourself some time.
Basically. And we have seen examples in the life of Jesus where somebody could be completely healed just by touching his cloak. Or Jesus can heal people remotely. You know, you don't have to have faith. You know the story of the centurion who sort of comes to...
Yes.
It comes back to the no atheists in the foxhole thing. Like, you can tell faith isn't something that Pike feels comfortable with. It's not his thing. But we see him at least drifting into the area of agnosticism and just flaunting with belief. Now, you could argue the surgery was successful. That's down to the science. And that was the thing that gets to take all the credit. But Christians, we still pray when we're going into surgery, or when we've got any kind of medical things on, and we thank the doctors, and we also give praise to God at the same time, because it's those two things aren't contradictory as we see him. So you could argue that the God of the Bible intervenes, hears Pike's prayer and intervenes at this point, and sort of helps to bring Marie back, at least for this case. And that's a valid interpretation. That's fine. But for me, seeing somebody in the Star Trek universe who is even nominally Christian, even has a shred of belief, that's a massive deal. Do you know what I mean?
I feel if you had to pick between which one Roddenberry would hate more, Pike being compared to Jesus or Pike saying the Lord's Prayer, it would probably be saying the Lord's Prayer, right?
Yeah.
Which is, it's just, it's nice to be a rebel sometimes.
Yeah. And whilst Gene created Star Trek, he wrote 3 seasons. He kind of got pushed out of the films. He had a lot to say about the first 2 or 3 seasons of TNG, and then he got ill, and after that, other people picked up the ball and ran with it. So, yes, it's his show and it's his world, but it is a humongous collective effort at this point.
Yes.
It's Ronald D. Moore's world. It's Akiva Goldsman's world. It's all these people who've had something to do with it. But I'm not going to lean into the sort of discriminated against thing when it comes to Christianity, because we are the biggest religion on the planet. We kick ass. We're one of the biggest. The Catholic Church is one of the biggest humanitarian organizations. I can't stand those Christians like, oh, they made you not wear your cross. That's so terrible. And
you can't say Merry Christmas anymore.
Exactly. I'm not going to be one of those people. But Star Trek was one of those areas where we were excluded, and it was okay for us to be excluded. And when you're excluded from one of your favourite things, that hurts a little bit. So seeing just one person in there who even tangentially believes what we believe, that was a big deal. That was a massive thing.
I feel like in the Star Trek universe, it's probably not a wildly out of pocket thing to be like, God exists, but he's probably like a nebula or something. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there was the nebula in that was able to save Rukia, which was just a big brain essentially just formed from nowhere in the middle of the universe. and was like, yeah, I can do that. Boom. I can make everyone think that they're in fantasy bookland. Boom. You know? It could be God. It could be a nebula.
Absolutely. Okay. So, on that note, that rounds up our episode. I swore I said it was going to be like a shorter episode. I always say that. I always have such dreams, and then those dreams crumble. We're going to say a quick thank you to our patrons who support us on Patreon. So that's James Pittard, Sally Masala, Sarah Cooper, Phil Coleman, Lance Kane, and one Natalie Faye Miniker. Thank you so much for supporting us, guys. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
If you have been, thank you so much for listening. Join us next week when we'll be getting into the new show by Angel Studios called Testament. Check it out. Julia, have you had a good time?
I always have a good time.
Yeah, me too. All right, ladies and gents, see you next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.
God in Film is hosted and created by Giles Goff.
That's me.
Mixing and editing by Giles. Our logo was designed by
Julie Walsh.
And our theme tune was composed by
Rick Lee.
Waffle editing by
Natalie Miniker.
Please rate and review.
Please give us 5 stars because that's a nice thing to do.